Ladies and gentlemen, I am Yusrael and welcome to my first impressions of the Avenger class battlecruiser. Is this the vessel that proves Klingon shipwrights correct when it comes to dual cannons on cruisers, and will it reduce other Starfleet cruisers to hauling garbage? We shall see. Aesthetics first. The Avenger retains the basic Starfleet design of saucer, secondary hull and twin nacelles, but it's compacted, this thing is barely the length of an Odyssey saucer, gunned up and bulked up. The end result, especially when you combine it with a unique dark grey and black paint job that seems to owe quite a bit to the USS Vengeance from Into Darkness, is an impression of a ship intended to take a beating and dish one out in return, with looking pretty being very much a secondary concern, which seems to have been what the designers were aiming for, so props to them. A particularly nice touch is that most of the ship's windows are not only recessed into the hull, but will deploy endgame style armour on entering combat, as do the nacelle sides. Most of the windows. The one rather interesting exception is, of all things, the two windows on the bridge dome. Actually, I'd question why this ship even has an identifiable bridge dome, instead of having a CIC buried somewhere on Deck 6. But since that and the split neck, which is a personal dislike of mine, are the only things I can point to about this design that make me go meh, overall I have to admit that I quite like the look of the thing. It's not pretty, but then neither was the Defiant. On a more practical note, the baseline numbers. 37.5k hull is relatively weak for a cruiser, most Starfleet retrofit cruisers have at least 39k, but a shield modifier of 1 is on par with other fleet cruisers, and it isn't too shabby as a general rule. 500 crew is a little on the low side for a cruiser, and a console layout of 4 tactical, 4 engineering but only 1 science is going to force some interesting decisions on shipbuilders, particularly considering shield regen versus shield capacity, since both of those are science consoles. Upgrading to the fleet hull gets you an extra science console, along with the usual 10% extra hull and shields, which goes a fair way to mitigate the design's biggest problems. The overall lack of durability compared to most Starfleet cruisers is also offset by a base turn of 9 degrees per second. This is currently just the most agile Starfleet cruiser in game. The Excelsior has a base turn of 8, and it means the Avenger doesn't have too hard of a time keeping its guns on target. Yes, the guns. The main selling point of the Avenger is its weapons fit of 5-4 and 3 aft, making it the latest in a trend that started with the Kumari and has carried on through the Dreadnought Warbirds and the Arkeef. In addition, it is currently one of only 2 Starfleet cruisers that can mount dual cannons, the other being the Galaxy X Dreadnought, but unlike the Gal-X, this has both the agility and the bridge officer slots to make decent use of them. On top of this, we have the variable automatic targeting armament system and a few missed Fallout jokes. This is a universal console, and in many ways it acts as an extra torpedo tube. It has a 90-degree forward firing arc, can go in any console slot, and while the 2-minute recharge is long, the torpedoes themselves are a little bit special. Using the console launches 2 torpedoes isn't quite the right word, since torpedoes don't generally fire off weapons of their own on the way to the target. Exactly what effect the torpedoes have depends on what cruiser command you have active. Since we're on the topic, cruiser commands are something new that will eventually be rolled out to the other Starfleet and Klingon cruisers. The Romulans aren't getting these at the moment. These are passive auras that cruisers can deploy to boost themselves and nearby teammates, and of the 4 available, which variously boost shield hardening, weapon efficiency, manoeuvrability and threat control, the Avenger has all but threat control. On the other hand, if an Avenger captain wants the enemy's immediate and undivided attention, then frequently all he'll have to do is open fire. Back onto the torpedoes. The Vata torpedoes change their effect to complement which command you have active. The default mode, which also applies if you're using the weapon efficiency command, is essentially a heavily boosted quantum torpedo that not only does about 10,000 damage in a 1500 meter blast, remember you get 2 of these, and has 20% shield penetration rather than the usual 10%, no, if that wasn't enough, it also fires mini quantum torpedoes at random targets on the way. These only do 540 damage, give or take, but they launch once a second, so if you're launching at, say, 6 or 7 kilometres out, that's potentially 8 to 10 launches in total before the big boom happens. Under the shield hardening command, the missiles instead launch in tachyon mode. There's less damage here. The mini torpedoes are replaced by a tachyon beam that does about half the damage of the mini quantum torps, and the big boom only does about 4,000 damage per torpedo. Again, remember you get 2 of these. The kicker is that it also does 1,000 damage, give or take, to all shield facings of targets caught in the blast, and it weakens affected shields by 15% for 15 seconds, so it's a great opener if you then deploy rapid fire or scatter volley and collapse even thick shields in fairly short order. Finally, strategic manoeuvring boosts the Avenger's speed and turn rate, so to add insult to injury, Vata switches into chroniton mode. As with the tachyon mode, this trades raw damage for a special effect. In this case, you lose about a quarter of the damage on the main explosion for a chroniton proc that will significantly reduce enemy turn rate and flight speed for a fairly extended period, typically about 20 seconds. The mini torpedoes are more conventional chroniton torpedoes. The proc is more random, the damage is about the same as the tachyon beam, with a key difference that it's kinetic damage rather than pure anti-shield damage, so if you do happen to hit a bare hull, it will at least have some effect. There's also a bonus for players with the Tactical Escort retrofit or the Galaxy X. The Avenger is fitted for, but not with, a cloaking device console, and it's the same console that comes with these ships. It's an interesting idea from Cryptic, even if it's a fairly blatant case of, hey guys, if you buy this other high-end ship as well... Finally, we have the bridge layout, and it's very similar to the Regent class, with a Lieutenant Commander and Ensign tactical stations providing the teeth, Commander Engineering giving most of the durability, a Lieutenant Science at least covering the basics, and a Universal Lieutenant allowing for customization. It's an unsubtle layout, especially if you plonk a Tactical Lieutenant into the Universal slot, but that suits a very unsubtle ship. So, my thoughts after this first weekend. Let's start with a quick look at the competition. The Avenger costs 2,500 Zen. On the escort front, that will get you an Armitage Heavy Escort, a Fleet Defiant, or a Fleet Prometheus. The level of firepower is debatable. The Avenger has the extra weapon slot, but the Armitage has a hangar bay, and both the Defiant and the Prometheus have 5 tactical consoles. All 3 escorts have tactical commanders, so they can make better use of their weapons and attack patterns, and all have got the speed and agility to make bombing runs with mines a practical proposition, especially when you mix it with Tricobalt or web mines and dispersal pattern beta 3, something the Avenger can't do. In addition, the Defiant has a cloak as part of the package, as well as a very tactical heavy bridge, so it's an excellent ambush ship, and the Prometheus has a Science Lieutenant Commander, so it can bring its own gravity well for crowd control, and it can muck about with some of the more advanced science powers as well. On top of that, of course, it also has multi-vector assault mode for when commanding just one starship is a little bit passé. On the other hand, even with fleet hulls, all 3 escorts are significantly less durable than the Avenger. On the cruiser side, the competition is mainly from the Fleet Excelsior, the Tactical Odyssey, and the Regent. The other cruisers, such as the Ambassador and the Galaxy Retrofit, are pure tanks to a large extent, and they're aiming at a very different type of captain. The first point to be observed, I think, is that the Avenger and the Fleet Excelsior between them wipe out the Regent, with the notable exception of the wide-angle torpedo tube, something that doesn't really justify 2,500 Zen on its own. Both ships are more manoeuvrable than the Regent, the Avenger significantly outguns it in the offensive role, and the Fleet Excelsior outperforms it as a tank, courtesy of higher hull, higher shield mods, and, bluntly phrased, an Ensign Engineering over an Ensign Tactical. Small difference, but it does make quite a bit of odds in performance. As an aside, even as someone who has a soft spot for the older ships, it does feel a little odd to be writing off the Excelsior's successor's 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 successor, while the old warhorse is still trucking on. On the cruiser side, we're therefore left with the Avenger, the Fleet Excelsior, and the Tactical Odyssey, and that produces a scale running from the firepower orientated Avenger through the hybrid, for want of a better term, Excelsior, and then onto the defensive and multi-role Odysseys before carrying on into the more traditionally defensive cruisers. But to buy or not to buy, that is the question, and as usual it's not a straight yes or no answer. Escort drivers looking for a bit more durability and cruiser drivers looking for a lot more firepower are going to find much to like about the Avenger. Indeed, that goes for anyone in any vessel who wants damage output near to that of an escort, but not liking the tendency to go boom at the slightest provocation. There are two catches though. Firstly, it should be remembered that to get maximum firepower on an Avenger requires dual cannon and turrets. Not a problem if you're already running an escort, but cruiser and science vessel captains will be buying new guns to go along with their shiny new ship, so that's something to bear in mind. You will basically be fitting a whole vessel out from scratch. Secondly, if you're looking for a tank that can deal some damage, as opposed to a damage dealer that can take some hits, then the Fleet Excelsior is perhaps the better balanced ship. It's got thicker hull and shields, has an engineering ensign replacing the tactical ensign on the Avenger, and it retains the Lieutenant Commander tactical slot, so it can still deploy tactical team, fire at will, and a decent attack pattern, either beta or delta, depending on how aggressive or defensive you're being. It will also eventually be getting all 4 cruiser commands, so it will have the enhanced threat generation, making its life there a little bit more straightforward. My final niggle with the Avenger is its price, 2,500 Zen. When I first saw that, I thought it was a misprint, and I'm still wondering. The original rule back in the day was 2,000 Zen for a 9 console ship, and 2,500 for a fleet grade 10 console ship. But Cryptic have been blurring this for a while now. The Atrox, Armitage, Regent and Avenger are all 9 console hulls, but they cost 2,500 Zen. However, the Armitage has a special console and a hangar bay. The Regent had a special console and the wide-angle torpedo, which is something you still can't get any other way. The Atrox has 2 hangar bays, unique fighters, a spectacularly thick hull, at more than 40,000 in a Vice Admiral ship, and a double Lieutenant Commander setup. The Avenger has a console and the ability to equip dual cannon. Is the capability to load dual cannon worth 500 Zen? I'm not convinced, especially not when I then go and look at the Scimitar. That's also 2,500 Zen. It has the same weapons loadout, 5/3 with dual cannon, it has a special console, but it also packs a 5th tactical console, a more flexible bridge layout, universal ensign and lieutenant commanders, a hangar bay, potentially with a unique frigate, innate battle cloak, so no buying another ship and no using a console slot, 10% thicker shields, and a 6.6% thicker hull, for the loss of 2 degrees per second base turn. As things stand, I'd be inclined to argue that the best defensive option for Starfleet right now is a Romulan tactical captain in a Scimitar, and the Avenger doesn't really change that. And as I've said, 500 Zen for dual cannon. Not entirely sold there, guys. If the Avenger was 2,000 Zen, I'd recommend it without any hesitation. As it is, it's principally for escort captains who want a bit more durability without blowing too much of their firepower, and cruiser captains who likewise want bigger guns without blowing too much of their endurance. Anyone else should be giving the matter some careful thought. I am Yusril, those have been my thoughts on the Avenger, and until next time, farewell.